Good evening. My name is Michael Golden. I retired from the Wyoming Supreme Court in 2012 after serving 24 years as a justice on that court, 2 of those years as Chief Justice. Tonight, I will serve as moderator of this 2018 general election gubernatorial debate, featuring all the candidates seeking to be Wyoming's next governor. Tonight's debate is sponsored by Wyoming Public Radio, Wyoming PBS, Casper College, and the Casper Star-Tribune. We're in the beautiful Wheeler Concert Hall on the campus of Casper College. I want to thank the voters from across Wyoming who submitted topics and questions for this debate. A 3-person panel composed of 1 representative from each sponsoring media used those submissions to curate and prioritize tonight's questions. These representatives will pose the questions to the candidates. Our panel for tonight's debate: Dallas Ballard, opinion editor, Casper Star-Tribune; Craig Blumenshine, public affairs producer, Wyoming PBS; Tennessee Watson, journalist, Wyoming Public Radio. Our timekeeper tonight is Tristan Zamora, a sophomore student from Rawlins, where I practiced law a long time ago. Tristan is a member of the Casper College forensics team. We'll open tonight's debate by asking each candidate to answer a question they were given 24 hours in advance. Then each candidate will be given the opportunity to answer direct questions from the panel, as well as respond or comment on other candidates' questions. Then there will be a lightning round where participants will be given 20 seconds each to respond to a singular topic. And finally, candidates will be given 60 seconds for a closing remark. The candidates have agreed to pre-negotiated rules for the debate in which the moderator has total discretion to settle timing disputes. We would ask you in the audience to refrain from applauding or heckling during the event. I can't imagine you would heckle, so that we can best use the short time allotted for this important debate. Position on stage and the order of opening answer and the direct questions were determined by drawing names from a hat a few minutes before the candidates took the stage. And now it is my honor and pleasure to introduce to you, from left to right, the candidates running to be Wyoming's next governor. And they are here before us on this stage. First, Mary Throne. Next, Mark Gordon. Next, Rex Rammell. And finally, Lawrence Struempf. As I previously stated, in lieu of the opening statement, each candidate was given the following question 24 hours in advance. And now they each have 60 seconds to answer. Here is the question. There is no question that funding for education is a top topic for Wyoming, and you each have had the entire campaign to consider solutions. The voters of Wyoming deserve specifics from you tonight. Where specifically will you find additional revenues, and what specifically remains to be cut in the K through 12 education to balance the projected several $100 million funding deficit? The first to answer the opening question will be Mary Throne.
Thank you, Justice Golden, and thank you to all who helped put this debate together. Education in Wyoming is a fundamental right in our Constitution. Our founders thought it was so important that they guaranteed the right of every child in Wyoming to have a quality education. And over the last several years, we have developed a constitutional funding model. But unfortunately, the legislature has thought fit to cut chunks of it. And going forward, we have to find revenues and meet our constitutional obligations. I have advocated looking at our tax structure. I think we could also divert some money into our investment portfolio to strengthen the income stream. We could talk about property taxes, but mostly we have to talk about a fair, equitable, and competitive tax structure that can fund education. I'm really curious to see what Mark has to answer to this question, because he has said that the hard truth is we can improve efficiencies, but we have to do more with less in education. However, he told the Tribune-Eagle that he wants to expand education in Wyoming. But I support 100% funding for education.
Thank you. And now the question goes to Mark Gordon.
Well, thank you, Justice Golden, and thank you to all the sponsors and for you all showing up here tonight. My kids, all four of them, were educated right here in Wyoming, and I served on the school board after they had gone through school. It is absolutely correct that we need to make sure that our kids have a top-flight education. And many of our kids go on to great schools, including the University of Wyoming. This was an issue we saw some time ago, and one of the reasons why we chose to change the way the Treasurer's Office manages those funds so that we could make sure more current income was delivered to try to advance those gaps. But I think there are other things that we need to do, and part of that needs to settle with the local school boards. As a school board member, I realize that from a top-down approach, it is very hard to calibrate what's going to work in Meeteetse and what's going to work in Natrona County. I think it's very important that we give some accountability and some guidance to our school boards to be able to make those choices. Thank you.
Thank you. The next opening question is for Rex Rammell.
Thank you, and good evening, Wyoming. It's great to be with you. Beautiful venue, and thank you for all the hosts. We're one of the top spending states in the United States on education. We have been as high as 7th. I said we're probably in the top 10 as we speak, but our achievement scores are not matching it. It's interesting that Utah and Idaho spend roughly $7,000, $8,000 per student. We're spending over $16,000, but their achievement scores are better than ours. There's a disconnect. There's something wrong. There's a flaw in the system, and I believe that the next governor's got to dig deep into this problem and see what the issue is. Utah actually goes with a school choice model, and I'm not the Republican candidate, but I espouse a lot of Republican ideals. And school choice is really helping that state. They've kept their costs down, but their achievement scores are high. And if I'm the governor, I think we ought to look at their model. And now the question is to Lawrence Struempf.
Thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure. So I grew up in Wyoming. I graduated high school in Wyoming. My kids have all attended public school in Wyoming, and we need to protect the education. We need to protect the schools. So I did research. I believe any good manager or leader needs to work with accurate research data. And so I went to WyoFiles and U.S. Energy Information Administration. Found out that Wyoming is one of the lowest property taxes in the nation at 0.61%, while our neighbors like South Dakota is 1.32%, and Nebraska is 1.83%. If we simply increased our property tax from 0.61% to 1% statewide flat, that would take care of our revenue gap. That would take care of the funding through K through 12. And you're saying, well, why? Anyhow, it is important that we grow our economy and that we have educated citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we will begin the direct questioning of the candidates from our panel. The first question from our panel of journalists is from Dallas Bauer and goes to Mary Throne.
Justice Gordon. Or to Mr. Gordon, excuse me.
To Mr.
Justice.
Gordon first? All right, my fault.
Yes.
All right. Mr. Gordon, 60 seconds.
Mark, the legislature has repeatedly rejected attempts to expand Medicaid, despite estimates from the health department that it could extend coverage to nearly 20,000 uninsured adults. As governor, would you support Medicaid expansion? Why or why not?
So this is a question that's come up quite a bit during the election, and I do not support it. I think that Wyoming has some really good opportunities to try to, on a more customized approach, be able to resolve this problem. We can take cues from Alaska, we can take cues from some of our neighboring states, and with the Republican reform of the Affordable Care Act, it now gives us opportunity to do associated care plans and a number of other things. I've really talked about some of the bigger issues, like how do we make transparency an important part of our medical billing? How can we make sure that our costs come down so that we are able to make sure that we have competition across state lines? Something we already have, but we have very high costs. But the big thing about Medicaid expansion that concerns me is, can Wyoming afford it, especially over time? And this is an enormous issue, so I'd really rather focus on bringing those costs down.
And now, Rex Rammell.
No, I do not favor Medicaid expansion, and I think it is another flawed model. I think that we are putting our poor citizens in bondage to be respectful. The more we subsidize them, the more they rely on it, and there's a better way. There's a better way to take care of them, and that is to strengthen the economy and help them take responsibility for their lives, better paying jobs. That's a better model than just handing them money and expecting them to continue to live that lifestyle.
Mr. Struempf?
So I am in favor of Medicaid expansion. When you look at, I've talked with a variety of hospital managers and board members, and they all pretty much concur that the hospitals would have greater profit margins if we did Medicaid expansion. Not only that, but it would lower medical costs by providing preventative care to people in need, so they wouldn't have to wait until they had to go to the emergency room to get care, at which case the hospital. So I strongly encourage whoever the next governor is to pass Medicaid expansion.
And now Mary Throne.
Of course, I support Medicaid expansion. It's one of the reasons I ran. We have an easy way to get health care to 20,000 of our neighbors. Montana has expanded Medicaid, and their uninsured rate is much lower than ours. They've provided 26,000 mental health outpatient visits to their population. I am really frustrated that Mark continues to say he has a solution for this population when he has none. Of course we can afford it. We take $2 billion in federal money with assorted matches. We can do the same with Medicaid.
Thank you. And now the next question.
Mark gets a rebuttal if he would like.
All right, okay.
So this issue is an important one for Wyoming. If you look at what Alaska did, Alaska was able to reduce their health insurance costs by 20% by thinking out of the box. If we continue to follow whatever the model is that the federal government gives us, we'll continue to have the challenges that are brought with that. I think Wyoming deserves, and Wyoming citizens deserve, a Wyoming-based solution, and I've offered several of those, so thank you.
All right, now the next question from Craig Blumenshine.
Dr. Rammell, Senate Revenue Committee Chairman Ray Peterson made the following statement recently. My question back to the public is, how has that worked for Wyoming so far? How long have we not had a corporate or personal income tax, and where's the boom? Where's all these businesses coming to Wyoming? In other words, why haven't businesses already flocked to low-tax Wyoming? Your thoughts?
I think there's multiple issues. Number one, it's a natural resource state. most of the economy is based on that industry. And so it's not set up for major companies to come in here. We've got to live with what God gave us, and that is a robust fossil fuel industry at times. That is a good tourism industry, and agriculture and wildlife. I think that we just stay with what we have. I'm not opposed to trying to diversify the economy, but to try to make Wyoming into something that it's not, I think is unrealistic, and I think maybe that's where we failed in the past. Is we have the Wyoming Business Council, and now we have Endow, and they're throwing money out there trying to generate business in this area or that area that maybe really doesn't fit Wyoming. I think we stay strong on our legacy industries, and I believe that we can be successful.
Thank you. And follow up, Mr. Struempf.
Thank you. I believe that it is critical that we support our current industries, our coal, our oil, our natural gas, but we need to diversify our economy, and we need to work strong to do that. One thing which Wyoming is one of the few states in the nation does not have a renewable standards portfolio for renewable energy. With that, we'd attract more wind farms and renewable energy resources. So it is critical that we do other things, and as I mentioned on the tax structure, increasing property tax from 0.61% to 1%.
Thank you, sir. Mary Throne, would you like to comment?
I think, excuse me, during the boom times, we don't make enough effort to attract new businesses. And during the bust, we slash and burn, and we make ourselves unattractive for business opportunities. So what I have advocated is just breaking out of that cycle and doing things completely differently this time around. We have to talk about how we can pay our bills going forward so we can provide the necessary services and strong communities and a strong education system to attract business to the state.
Now,
Mark Gordon.
So, thank you very much. There really is no need for a personal income tax, and I'm against taxes already. I think one of the most important things is how we get a fiscal situation that is sustainable and stable over time. As I've talked to businesses around the world, they all say Wyoming looks like a great place to move, but we want to make sure that you have a fiscal stability in place that makes it clear that we aren't going to see a changing tax structure over time. We can also work on developing our workforce. Thank you.
All right. Now,
I'll tell you one of the biggest problems with the natural resource industry is we've got a bunch of radical environmental groups that have just bombarded Wyoming trying to destroy the fossil fuel industry. And Mark knows it's coming, but he's been part of it. He had a clever ad called War on the West, and he's part of the War on the West. Can you imagine having a governor that doesn't support the fossil fuel industry? That's the number one thing we need to make sure of. We need to stop these environmentalists, and I will go to war with them.
Next question now.
The next question is from
me, from Tennessee.
From Tennessee, Watson.
And this is for Lawrence. During the 2018 session, the legislature passed Senate File 93, allowing but not requiring schools to implement sexual abuse prevention and education. There was no additional state funding provided, and it was left up to each district to decide whether to prioritize this issue. Yet studies show that children are most vulnerable to sexual abuse between the ages of 7 and 13. Victims face long-term health consequences from substance abuse to depression to suicide. Given the prevalence of the problem and the cost down the line, should this matter be left up to districts? Or should the state become more involved in the prevention of sexual abuse?
I believe that we need to have some set of standards. And so in Wyoming with this, we need the state should be involved and create a standard and mandate it. The safety of our children and their education is the most important. I know that then we have to fund it, and so we would need to provide funding. And I've mentioned some viable ways to provide funding, but we have to work to build our education system, not only with, sexual, prevention, or, but also, adding, art back in and creativity into the education and computers. And we really need to focus on our K through 12, or we're not going to have the business people and the entrepreneurs of the future. Our children are what are going to make our future. The natural resources are finite, they're limited, and we've already hit peak production. So our children and their safety and their education are the future of Wyoming.
Member Throne, would you like to comment?
During my 10 years in the legislature, I learned that you don't always get the whole enchilada on the first try. And I'm guessing that it had to be optional and it had to be not funded to even bring up the discussion. So I think it's a good first step, but we need to give the school districts more support, more resources in how to implement this. As the mother of 3 sons, I think it's very important that the school system help children know and how to identify when they're at risk of sexual abuse.
Mr. Gordon?
Yeah, thank you. First and foremost, kids need to be safe. I taught my daughters to be strong, and I taught my sons to be respectful. I'm a pro-family Republican, and I feel very strongly that those values need to be taught at home. The point you make is about what we do about school systems. And when the state starts mandating these things, as opposed to giving guidance to school boards and saying this is something we'd like to see, I think it is important that we give those options to the school board to meet those needs.
Mr. Rammell.
It's unacceptable is what it is. And if necessary, the state should get involved. We cannot have sexual abuse at any level, whether it's out of the school or in the home, wherever. And parents need to know that if this is happening, it is one of the worst crimes that there is, and they must be punished, and the schools should be very much involved, and we should give them power to alert officials and take care of this problem. We cannot allow this.
Mr. Struempf, rebuttal.
I will repeat what I said, that we need to support the school districts. We need to have a statewide standard to ensure that the kids are getting educated, because there may be some schools that say, oh, we don't want to teach, about, sexual crimes or anything. And we need to make a standard across the state ensuring that students get educated on sexual crimes. Thank you.
Now our next question from Dallas.
This question's for Mary. In 2018, school shootings have continued at a disturbing rate. Last year, the legislature gave individual school districts permission to arm teachers. What other steps, if any, should Wyoming take to keep its students safe?
Oh, there are a lot of steps Wyoming should take to keep its students safe. And I believe that one of the first things we need to do is review whether we have enough counselors, social workers. The key, according to all the professionals and also during the testimony that the Federal Department of Education had in Cheyenne, the key is really to identify children in need of mental health services early, to give them the supports they need, to give the supports to the children who are bullied. So that's really a way to prevent the problems that can sometimes turn into school shootings. Also, we need to fully fund school resource officers for our school districts. It's not in the model right now. We expect security, but we don't provide for it. And then, of course, there's the physical security of the building. But if a shooter gets to a school, we have already failed. And so I'd like to look at steps to prevent that.
Mr. Gordon?
Well, I think there are a number of steps that we can take to harden schools, and the state can make an effort to try to help school districts be able to make those choices on a local basis. I think it's incredibly critical that we give each school board the opportunity to talk about what it needs to do to defend its school. I also believe that mental health is a part of that equation, and I would support making sure we have the resources necessary to be able to help identify and address mental health issues.
Mr. Rammell.
I totally support what the legislature did. I love the idea that, and I've seen posters that say this is a gun zone, or that there are guns on this property, so that it would dissuade outsiders or even the kids from carrying guns. But we can't allow this, and it's not a school board issue. This should be a state mandate that we have protection at our schools. And if it's a public school, then the kids ought to be able to go there and be safe, and the parents ought to know that they're safe. If there's some kind of check-in mechanism, and up in Gillette, I remember they close the doors. They don't let anybody in.
All right, Mr. Struempf.
As growing up on a cattle ranch in Wyoming, I'm a high school teacher and a college professor, and I believe so strongly in our Second Amendment rights to own and bear arms. But I would much rather have a trained security guard at our schools than to have the teachers carry. And I know, even though I consider myself very good with firearms, I would not feel comfortable carrying a firearm in the schools. That student might get a hold of it or some. So I am not in favor of that, and I would work to find funding to put security guards at the schools.
Ms. Throne, you want to respond?
I'd just like to add that the legislature passed a really important program a few years ago called the Safe to Tell program, which is a dedicated tip line for students to call in and report suicide risks, bullying, or threats to the schools. And I think this is one of the most important things that the legislature has done in the last few years, because those tip lines are followed through to the end, and that way we can also keep our schools safe.
Now, the next question, Mr. Blumenshine.
Thank you, Justice. Mark, Endow members have said that research indicates that an anti-discrimination law in Wyoming would have, quote, high impact, and close quote, on attracting new skilled workers to the state. Do you agree with that statement? And if you don't, do you believe existing civil rights law that prohibits discrimination based on gender also bans discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity?
Well, thank you for that question. I think the Wyoming Constitution has some of the most really good language about this issue. It really protects both politically and personally the rights of all citizens, regardless of condition, regardless of race, creed, color, etc. It's Article 1, Sections 2 and 3. My light's red. And,
should have more time.
Okay, thank you. But and I know that others may feel that we have to create statutes in order to make Wyoming feel friendly. It's a shock to me, because I think Wyoming is a friendly place. And I actually served on a selection panel for our pastor, and was surprised to be discriminated against, because this pastor had a view that Wyoming was somehow against other people. And my problem with that was, have you come here? Have you visited Wyoming? Have you met its people?
Mr. Rammell?
I do not support any legislation furthering anti-discrimination efforts. I believe that there's some things that you just really can't legislate. Moral issues are really hard to legislate. I think if there's a problem, which I'm not aware, really, not in my world, I think that it's more of an education issue, a respect issue, a cultural issue. I think most people in Wyoming respect everybody. There's probably isolated cases, but not enough to make a big deal out of it and make a bunch of laws.
Mr. Struempf.
Thank you. I feel that we could use more enforcement in that area. I had met Matthew Shepard, and I knew some of his friends fairly well, and whenever they wanted to do anything, they would go down to Fort Collins because they didn't feel safe in Wyoming. And we need to do stuff so that people can come here and feel safe. They shouldn't have to worry about their health or their safety because they have different views than others. Thank you.
Now, where am I, Mary?
You're with me. Absolutely, I support a non-discrimination law. I supported it when I was in the House. It passed the Senate 26-4. This is something with mainstream support in Wyoming. And the business community supported it too, because they wanted to send the message that Wyoming is open for business. If we want to attract a younger demographic to the state, we have to pass this law. There are great people in Wyoming, but there are people who discriminate. And we need to have protections in place for that small percentage of people who discriminate. And that does not exist in state law today.
Now, Mr. Gordon has rebuttal time.
So thank you. And in my view, a crime is a crime. And as governor, I will never allow discrimination in this state. And if there is a crime committed, I will prosecute it under the fullest extent of the law. Murder is murder. Rape is rape. All of those issues need to be dealt with under the current body of law. I think that's the key to making sure Wyoming stays the place it does. Thank you.
Now, Tennessee Watson, you have a question for Mr. Rammell.
Dr. Rammell, the number of Eastern Shoshone members living under the poverty line is 4 times higher than the rest of Wyoming. And for the Northern Arapaho, it's over 5 times higher. Tribal members in Wyoming also die much younger. The average age of death for the general population in Wyoming is 71 years old, but only 56 for Native Americans. What, as governor, could you do to help address these disparities while also upholding the sovereignty of the tribes?
And that's a key phrase there, the sovereignty of the tribe. We don't have jurisdiction over them, but we can help them. And I want to come back to this Medicaid issue where we send a check to people that are struggling. The tribes, they get checks in the mail, and when the government gets involved and starts taking care of people, that is the natural result. They stop working, and there's alcohol is a huge problem. I have friends on the Indian reservation, and I know that this is they have issues, but a lot of it's because they're not forced to work. It's called compassionate conservatism. When you say, we want to help you, we want to give you a hand up, but we're not going to give you a hand out. And I'd like to see Wyoming move that direction so less people become dependent on federal money, which is where the tribes are getting their money is from the federal government. But in the end, the governor doesn't have a whole lot to say about it.
Mr. Struempf?
Yes, well, I grew up on the reservation. I graduated high school at Wind River, and I have many friends that are both Shoshone and Arapaho. And back in the 80s, I remember we had the major suicide spring, and we tried putting money in to stop that. It is important that we work with them. I noticed that the casinos have been like a melting pot and helped, I think, in some degree, mix. But it is important to be aware, and of course, I'm always in favor of more research and talking with them and finding out what they would like and what they feel they need.
Now I'm back to Mary.
I was just on the reservation for 2 days this weekend, and it's probably my 4th time there. And I have committed to both the Northern Arapaho and the Eastern Shoshone that if I'm elected governor, they will have a partner in the governor's office, a partner who respects their culture, who respects their sovereignty, and who understands that they don't want to hand out, but they want to hand up. They are part of Wyoming. They are citizens of Wyoming. They are also sovereign nations. They generate revenue for the state of Wyoming, and they need economic development support like every other community in Wyoming, but on their terms.
And now, Dallas.
Mr. Gordon's turn.
All right, I'll get this one of these times.
No worries. Well, Wyoming already does have a little bit of a role to play in tribal health services, and I'll make sure that those are protected. But beyond that, I think I have also been to the reservation numerous times and have committed to meet with both the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho tribes on a regular basis to make sure that we have direct face-to-face connections as governor to sovereign nation and really work to try to find the best solutions that we can to benefit us all.
And now,
with all due respect to the tribes, I believe that this is socialism at its best. This is what happens when the government tries to redistribute the wealth and hands people money. it creates problems. And it's not just on the Indian reservation, it's happening in Wyoming. Some of the comments you're hearing tonight, it's socialism. It does not work. People have to take responsibility for their own lives or they go nowhere. If they don't have to work, work is good for people. If they don't have to work, it creates problems.
All right. Alice?
Lawrence, how would you rate mental health services in Wyoming? And if necessary, what would you do to improve mental health services, especially in rural communities?
I am not as knowledgeable in the rural communities. I know that Laramie and Cheyenne have very good mental health services. You know, being a professor at the college, I, you know, work with people who, you know, work at the mental health facilities. And so I believe they're very effective. But I imagine when you get into smaller communities like Pavilion or Du Bois or Crowheart or, you know, Ethity or even Lander, Pinedale, whatever, you may have much more issues. And so in order for me to really address it, I would want to, and what I hope to do when I'm governor is create localized community-based committees that are made up of community members in each county and have a representative from my office work with them to identify their health needs, their mental health needs, their economic needs, and try to figure out how I can best address each county's needs.
Thank you, Justice Golden. Access to mental health care is as important as access to health care. It's all health care. Medicaid expansion would help tremendously with health care. It would get revenue into the system so providers could be paid. I met a woman in Wheatland who used to have health care. She told me that she needs regular mental health services. She's over 50, she's working, yet she doesn't have access to health care. Medicaid expansion would give her continued access to mental health services. That's what we need to do in Wyoming.
Mr. Gordon.
Well, Medicaid expansion isn't the only way we can provide more services, and I know that because I served on the Northern Wyoming Mental Health Center, which had Johnson, Sheridan, Crook, and Weston counties, and so I am familiar with what goes on in rural areas, and we don't do enough. So what do? We have obviously options where we can add telemedicine, we can recruit individuals, we can direct services that direction, we can create a better workforce. These are all things that I think a Wyoming-based solution can provide.
Mr. Rammell.
Thank you. You know, I think a lot of the mental health issues tie back into our economy, believe it or not. When the economy's not doing well, you can see it in the lives of the people. They're under a lot of stress. They make decisions that they probably shouldn't. People are out of work. Suicide becomes a big issue. And I really believe that a lot of Wyoming's problems could be solved with a better economy. And I have some ideas on that I hope I get to share.
Mr. Struempf.
Thank you. So I agree with Mrs. Throne that Medicaid expansion would be beneficial in helping to fund and address the healthcare, mental health care needs. And another aspect that we really need to address in Wyoming is the opioid crisis that, you know, is basically pharmaceutical sponsored, and figure out ways that we can address dependencies, chemical dependencies, which help or contribute to mental health issues.
Now, Mr. Blumenschein.
Thank you, Justice. Mary, keeping in mind that Wyoming has among the lowest recidivism rates, but also among the longest criminal sentences, accommodating the projected prison population growth in Wyoming with additional contract beds and new prison construction would require $51 million in new spending. Is this the most affordable solution to ensure public safety?
No. We make a lot of decisions in Wyoming that are penny wise and pound foolish. We need to have adequate substance abuse treatment, both in the prisons and adequate substance abuse treatment for diversion programs. We need to look at our parole and probation system to avoid too many revocations that send people back to prison. Anything we can do to keep our prisoners' population at a manageable level is going to be a lot more cost effective than putting more people in prison, building more prisons. We need to adequately staff our prisons. I visited the Lusk prison, and the Women's Center lost its welding instructor. That makes absolutely no sense. The legislature did not fund that position. What a great skill to give women leaving that facility, to give them marketable skills. So we need to be a lot more sensible about how we manage our prison population so that we can actually save money going forward.
Mr. Gordon?
Well, I also think that a lot of our incarcerated population has a substance abuse problem, and serving on the Volunteers of America board, where we have a couple of substance abuse programs, I know that some of these we can address much more successfully if we get people back in their communities. And that's another program that VOA has, as a halfway house in Gillette. Being able to get people back into society with appropriate supervision and safely is a great thing to do. And finally, I think maybe we should look at those sentencing guidelines and see if they need to maybe look at ways to mitigate those over time. Thank you.
Mr. Rammell.
I was a volunteer at the Torrington Intermediate Prison for a year through my church, and I can tell you there are a lot of people in prison that probably shouldn't be there. There are other forms to get their attention. I'm a big fan of the honor farm system up in Riverton, and there's a program in Newcastle. These guys get to go out and work and get some self-esteem back. I think that is the bottom line when you talk about crimes is people lose their self-esteem and they don't feel like they're any good, and I like those systems. I would like to see them all over the state.
Mr. Struempf.
Well, first of all, I have great fears of for-profit prisons, because when we build a for-profit prison, we have to set quotas on how many prisoners we're going to have, and so it actually makes it for where we want to make sure that people serve longer terms in prison, which isn't fair. Opioid crisis is a huge issue, and research supports that legalizing marijuana for pain medication would greatly decrease the opioid crisis and help curb dependency on narcotics. Thank you.
Back to you, Mr. Owen.
The recidivism rate in Wyoming went up because of cuts the legislature made to key substance abuse programs. The legislature restored that funding, and I think with that, but we need to do more. Our recidivism rate should be under control. But I am looking forward to seeing the proposals that come out of the Judiciary Committee for broader criminal justice reform. We have some big chunks in our budget, and the Department of Corrections is one of the largest budgets in state government. And anything we can do to save money there is essential.
And now Tennessee Watson, a question for Mr. Gordon.
Mark, a 2018 report commissioned by the state legislature shows that women across the state, on average, earn just 68% of what men do. Closing the wage gap means women could afford more in tuition for higher education, more food for their families, more childcare, and more goods and services. What needs to happen to ensure that women get paid the same as their male counterparts?
Yeah, and it's an embarrassment, I think, to Wyoming to be the equality state and yet have perhaps the lowest and certainly bottom rung on that particular metric. I think it's very important that women earn as much as men for the same work, the same work. And so as governor, it's certainly something that I would take absolutely and put first and foremost. I think it is about leadership, and I think that some of the recommendations which this new commission, they've already released one report. They're about to, they came back and said, let's do a little bit more research, make sure our metrics are correct, our numbers are correct. I think there'll be great guidance that comes from that. I do believe that it is something that we need to address as a state, and as governor, it's certainly something that I feel very, very strongly about.
Mr. Rammell?
The rest of that story is that because of Wyoming's natural resource-based occupation field, that there are more jobs for men that are higher paying jobs. It's occupation-based. A lot of those mining jobs out in the field, the report I read is that there wasn't the big disparity if you discount that point, or if you consider that point, that it's the way Wyoming is built. Like I said in the beginning, we're a natural resource state.
Mr. Struempf.
Thank you. I also feel that we need to work to ensure that women get paid the same as men for the same jobs. It's not fair that men make more for doing the exact same thing. But in addition, I am currently working with education system to try to integrate technology into the curriculum of K through 12, so students start out in kindergarten using computers and technology, because as a college professor teaching computers, we don't have as many women in the area, and I believe that by integrating more technology into K through 12, more women will get into those fields. Thank you.
Mary Throne.
In the equality state, having such a huge gender pay gap is an embarrassment. It also discourages young women and young professional couples from even considering moving to Wyoming. So it's something we need to fix. I would say let's get more women in the natural resource field. Women can do the energy jobs, but we also have to have a statute that promotes wage transparency. That study did show that women are paid less for the same jobs. That's an enforcement issue that the governor can be in charge of. The governor can make sure we don't have a gender pay gap at the state level.
And now back to Mr. Gordon.
Well, thanks. And it is about the same wage for the same job. On the career and technical education, one of the things I'm recommending is that we pass a new trust fund under the Amendment A, that we focus really on career and technical education for everybody. And I also think that one of the things the governor can do, and I think this is very important, it's not about enforcement, it's about leadership, and it's about training people to ask for the wages that they deserve and to make sure that people respect women and men the same for the same wage.
And now, Dallas, you have a question for Mr. Rammell.
Dr. Rammell, premiums for health care benefits in Wyoming are among the very highest in the country, and there is growing evidence coming out of the multi-payer claims database that high unit prices for health care services are the driver. What will you, as governor, do to address the high cost of health care services in Wyoming?
Well, I think we've got to deregulate the whole industry. I think that's the problem. Insurance companies could come in here legally, but they won't. It's too expensive for them. And the reason is that the regulations are too strict. They make mandated coverage when it's not needed in all cases. If we deregulate and allow capitalism to take place and let them compete amongst themselves, you'll see the price come down. Hospitals are overregulated. There's a few things that we can't do, but I think that they're causing a lot of trouble, and that is mandatory admission into emergency rooms. There's a lot of people I know. I'm in the rodeo business. A lot of my young bull riders, they don't even get insurance because they know they can go right to the emergency room and get covered. And, that has to be done at the federal level, but people need to take responsibility. They need to get insurance, but we've got to make the environment so the insurance companies can come in here and make some money reducing the costs.
Mr. Struempf.
Thank you. So again, I think one of the biggest issues is preventive care. I know many people who are in that gap that don't have health coverage. And so when they do end up going to the hospital, they go to the emergency room. They're not as healthy, they're having more problems. And so I really feel that we're one of the few states in the nation that hasn't passed the Medicaid expansion, and it's just a responsible thing to do. If you talk with most medical providers and board members, they would agree that the hospitals, medical institutions, and the people want Medicaid expansion. Thank you.
Mary Throne.
I just love how many times tonight I get to talk about Medicaid expansion. Medicaid expansion would help reduce the costs because those costs get shifted onto people with insurance, and that does add to those high medical care costs. But also, we need to have more transparency so we really understand what's happening with those costs. We need to improve and encourage the use of telehealth across the state. It's used for mental health primarily now. It can be used for primary and specialty care, which will also help reduce the costs.
Mark Gordon.
So this issue is going to take a little bit of work with our federal delegation to really address some of the coding issues that drive some of those costs. I've talked about transparency on the costs that you see for medical care, but then just looking at what Medicaid expansion does, my concern is it really doesn't address the cost, the savings aspect. What we can do is develop a Wyoming-based solution like Alaska did, which reduced the premiums by over 20% by underwriting some certain conditions.
Back to you.
And I want to, I wish I could put an end to the Medicaid expansion debate, but that is borrowed money. The federal government is literally borrowing money to send to the states. One of these days, that money's going to run out. This country can't live on borrowed money, and I think the two opponents on the end, they act like that money's just growing on trees back in D.C. It's not. And one of these days, the federal government is going to come crashing down, and the more people we have dependent on federal money, they're going to be in trouble.
Now,
Lawrence, since the primary election, there's been discussion suggesting Wyoming change its policy of allowing voters to register and/or change their policy affiliations at the polls. Also, the idea of runoff elections has been discussed. Should Wyoming change its election law to support any of those policy suggestions?
I believe that people should stick to their guns, and it doesn't seem just, that someone changes parties to interfere with another party's election. Now, some states have it to where everyone can vote for everyone in the primaries. I mean, I could see something of that nature. But to where they change their party from one to another so they can vote for one party in the primary and then another party, or then another in the general, just doesn't seem logical to me.
Short answer, no. We need to do what we can to encourage people to vote, and if giving them the option of switching parties at the polls helps with that, I think that's a key policy consideration. I'd also say that I hope that the Democrats who switched over, whatever the number was, I know the jury's out on that, come back to me in the general election, please.
Mr. Gordon.
Well, thank you. And I'm on record saying that I would look favorably on something the legislature did to revise these laws. But one needs to remember that we're one of the very few states that is not subject to federal regulation because we do have same-day registration. And the ability to engage in political discourse is one of our most cherished traditions. So it is important that we facilitate that discussion. And so, as I said, I'm on record of saying that I would support some consideration.
Dr. Rammell.
I absolutely think we ought to be a runoff state. I've been in several big campaigns, and it's vote splitting amongst conservatives that produce a winner that really shouldn't be there. And with all due respect, Mark, if there was runoff in this state, you wouldn't be standing there. Foster Freeze would have won this election. You were probably the most liberal Republican, so-called Republican, I've ever met in my life. The positions you take and your positions with environmental groups, I can't even believe that you're yourself a Republican. It's amazing. If we had runoffs,
your time is up,
Mark
sir.
would not be eligible to be the governor.
Mr. Gordon, I cannot let that pass without you at least having a few seconds to rebut that.
Oh, well, thank you. I think the election was conducted under the current laws, done correctly. If Mr. Rammell wants to speculate on some other outcome, I guess, that's a possibility. But this election was conducted. I have been a Republican my entire life. Rex, you've been back and forth. So thank you for that opportunity.
Mr. Struempf.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to say on that, so I'm just going to say thank you so much for Wyoming Public Radio, Wyoming PBS, Casper College, and the Casper Star Tribune for putting this together, inviting us here, and thank all of you for coming and making this happen. I believe this is very good for the people of Wyoming, so thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Justice Golden, if I may, we're now ready for the lightning round.
All right.
And we'll have the lightning rounds now before we resume other questions.
And let's see, who wants to go with the lightning round? Dallas?
Or actually, it's Tennessee.
Yeah, I think
Or
it's
Tennessee?
Tennessee. Or Mary.
Yeah.
Forest fires.
Expensive, brutal, and most likely the product of climate change.
We need to work with the Forest Service to make sure that Wyoming has primacy in how we address those fires. It's unconscionable that we're told to stand down when we could put those fires out.
Let it burn, baby, let it burn. That's Forest Service policy. And I think it's why Wyoming should take control of the forest and our public lands so that that doesn't happen again. Biggest fire in Wyoming history, 61,000 acres, and they let it go and could have put it out. We need to be in control of our public lands.
I believe that we need to really support the logging industry. It is a shame to see a lot of lumber burn that could be used. At the same time, if we didn't control and regulate fires so much, then there wouldn't be such big fires. So if we allowed smaller fires to burn, we wouldn't have the big giant fires.
Next one's for Mark. University of Wyoming gun ban.
University of Wyoming gun ban. I am a staunch pro-Second Amendment individual, and so that's all I have to say on that.
No, there should not be a ban. It's a public institute. People have the right to bear arms, especially in this state.
I've been hunting my whole life. I've been an NRA member most of my life, and I believe in people's right to carry concealed firearms, but I believe that there should be institutions where firearms are not allowed, such as government buildings and the University of Wyoming.
The trustees make that decision, and I would defer to the trustees. I'd also say that as a parent, my son does not want people to have guns on campus, and we should listen to the people who live, work, and go to school there and not dictate something from Cheyenne.
Dr. Rammell, taxing services.
Taxing services? No, I hate taxes in general. I would never tax services. I think we're already taxed too much.
I believe that we need to control our taxing and focus it where I did my research and found a couple areas that I believe would be good, which are the property tax, just a 0.5%, and maybe moving some wind usage tax to wind production tax, but not services.
We need to look at all of our exemptions, and services need to be reviewed. And fellow members of the bar, don't shoot me for even saying that.
And I oppose taxes.
Sometimes.
And Dallas somewhere.
Go ahead, you're next.
Okay.
And that would be to Lawrence.
Okay. For Lawrence, hate crime laws.
Hate crime. I believe that we should look at the national standards, and it is good to have hate crimes. Like I said, I have lived in Laramie. I was there when Matthew Shepard was killed, and I've known a number of people in the LGBTQ environment who have been harassed and had fears. And so I think that we need to do something so that people who are here feel safe, and so that people who aren't here feel safe to come here.
Laws aren't for the people who have big hearts. Laws are to protect us against the people who don't. Wyoming is an outlier for not having a hate crimes law.
Mr. Gordon.
Oh, well, I think any hate crime should be prosecuted. A crime is a crime is a crime, and it should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law.
Dr. Rammell?
And I agree with that statement. I would not support it. It's hard to, like I said, it's hard to start making laws to govern that sort of thing. We need to educate our people on how to be kind and not pursue those paths. So, but I wouldn't do it legislatively.
Alice.
Mary, capital restoration.
Expensive, but necessary, and it's going to be gorgeous and make our meetings of the legislature much more accessible to the public.
Parts of it were necessary, and it grew beyond the bounds of what its original scope was, and it still needs to come in and be finished.
And I appreciate the new look. I'm going to like it there.
Well, I guess I'll be the one that opposes it. It just seems like a waste of money when you're laying teachers off, you're laying people off and shutting programs down around the state, and here you go making a nice, big, beautiful Capitol so we can have nicer meetings. I think the old building was just fine.
Mark, UW housing.
This UW housing needs to be improved. We're working in the Treasurer's office to try to figure out a way to do that without taxing people more, either by taxes or by taking earning capacity off the table by borrowing from ourselves.
And I support private housing also. We can't forget about the entrepreneurs out there that are trying to provide housing. If we think that we got to house everybody, what happens to them? So I think that it's okay in moderation, but let the private community make some money.
As a fiscal conservative, I believe that the dorms that we have now are the most fiscally responsible housing that we could possibly have. I know it's nicer to have more, but hey, let the private industry go and build new housing, and people can go and live there. But I discourage knocking down all the dorms that provide such affordable living for university students, because it will greatly increase the cost of college for them.
If we want to attract students to UW, we have to have new dorms. The dorm that I lived in for music camp 40 years ago is still there.
For Dr. Rammell, law enforcement shortages.
Law enforcement shortages. The laws have to be enforced. We have to maintain the proper level. I don't know what that is. I'm actually not aware that there's a major shortage. They seem to find me and my friends.
Sorry, I am not aware of the law enforcement shortage either. So when I'm elected, I will get a committee together, committees for each county, and they can assess the law enforcement needs, both the police department and sheriff's department within each county, and then we can evaluate how best to assist them.
Well, I'm hoping we don't get too much more law enforcement in the highway patrol during this campaign, because I kind of need to drive fast to get places.
It's an issue, and I think we need to look at where our comparative wages are and if there are ways that we can improve our systems of recruitment.
Alice.
Lawrence, grizzly hunting.
I want to go grizzly hunting. So growing up in Pavilion area on Ocean Lake, and I hunted all the time up in Du Bois, loved it. And back then it wasn't so bad. I mean, there really weren't that many grizzlies there. But now, if you want to go up fishing around Ring Lake or go over to Pelham Lake or up at Horse Creek or even around Yellowstone, it's dangerous. You better have a 12-gauge shotgun with you or a 44 mag, because those grizzlies they don't care. And if we hunted them, it would, if we had a state-managed hunt, it would limit their population and help them respect people a little more.
We need to win the lawsuit and get management back to the state level. We have good wildlife managers in the Game and Fish Department, and they can manage grizzly hunting in a way that protects the species. And I want that to come back to Wyoming, because I know people who are holding on to their grizzly bear hunting licenses, and they really want to be able to use them.
I think it's critical that Wyoming and Wyoming science, which is robust and complete, win the day. And it's important that the Endangered Species Act and the legal ways that it can be brought to its knees is put back on the right course. It was a well-intended law to start with that has gone radically off course, and it needs to be adjusted to allow state control.
I would have continued with the hunt if I was the governor. I think we got to stand up to these people. It was the environmental groups, Mark, that keep doing this to the state. They filed suit in Missoula and shut the hunt down. And I'm telling you, they're the ones making war on the West, and we have got to stand up to them. If I would like to remove their jurisdiction so they can't sue in federal court.
Mary, no bid contracts.
We have laws against those, and they're bad.
One reason I brought the lawsuit I did on the Capitol project was because we need to end the practice of no bid contracts.
Absolutely. It's ridiculous that any contract is awarded without going through a bidding process. That just tells me how bad a shape the government's in. Cronyism and on down. That's corruption is what that is.
Yeah, and I think we also, in addition to ensuring that we do not have no bid contracts, we also need to work to help Wyoming companies get more of the contracts. I see so many, go to Colorado and other base companies.
We're ready to resume the questions.
Which ones?
The normal questioning, we're ready to resume, and I think Tennessee has the next one.
Or Mark. During the 2017 school funding recalibration, consultants hired by the legislature recommended that investing in early childhood education and pre-K would improve learning outcomes for kids and save the state money on interventions that are more costly when kids are older. What's your stance on pre-K? Should it be available statewide?
I think that, again, this comes back to a school district by school district approach with guidance. And I think it is important that we provide pre-K. Now, if you look at the Bill School, which I visited recently, there's the opportunity to have pre-K there, and it's different in a place like Natrona or Laramie County. So I believe very strongly that we need to have pre-K education, and we need to provide the services that we can to make sure that works.
Mr. Rammell.
My wife was a public education teacher for a dozen years, and when it came to pre-K, she said that it's not necessary. The kids catch up. The ones that initially go, they get a little bit ahead, but within a couple of years, the other kids have all caught up to them, and we did that with our kids, and our kids were just fine. They didn't need to go to pre-K. It's just more money to be spent on an already expensive department.
We need to look at the rest of the world. Right now, back in the 70s, we were one of the leading countries in the world with education. Now, we're at the bottom of all developed countries in the nation. We have one of the worst education outcomes in the world, and we need to work on it. And most of the kids around the world start or before kindergarten. And so it is important, as Wyoming, if we want to be a global contender and address a global marketplace, we need to address pre-K.
I supported early childhood my entire time in the legislature. Dollar for dollar, it's one of the most cost-effective programs we could implement, and it needs to be available statewide. It shouldn't depend on where children are located. Mark likes to talk a lot about Alaska. Alaska has early childhood, and I've recently met a retired teacher from Alaska who said that it was the best investment they ever made. It improves reading outcomes and prevents the need to do interventions later.
Back to Mr. Gordon.
Well, as I said, I support the program, but I also think this is an opportunity for parents. It's important that we set this everything right for a kid going into school, because if the more they like school, the more they're willing to stay there, the more they want to go on to further education, whether it be CTE or whether it be advanced education. In either event, setting that right environment to start with, and having parental involvement is absolutely critical. Read to your kids.
Okay, for Dr. Rammell. President Donald Trump took office promising to save the coal industry, but despite a friendly administration, coal hasn't rebounded anywhere near close to pre-bust levels. Given the market realities, what is coal's future in Wyoming?
I think I'm worried about it. I think Mark and his friends did a tremendous amount of damage. Mark, you have supported Sierra Club and Rocky Mountain Institute and Friends of Earth and a whole host of other anti-fossil fuel groups, and you can't tell me that they didn't have an impact on the coal industry. That's the reason we're struggling, and I come back to my solution. We've got to fight these guys tooth and toenail all the way to the bitter end. We've got to get these environmentalists out of this state so that our coal industry can rebound, and our other fossil fuels. We've got to protect them all. I can't believe that we've got a potential governor sitting here that is opposed to fossil fuels, and he'll say that he's not, but his resume says that he is. He has supported these people all the way through. And in fact, he's supporting Bank of the West now. Bank of the West said they're not going to fund anybody in the coal industry. And Mark was all against them 2 months ago. And then last meeting, oh, maybe we can work with them.
So I believe, and I mean, everyone knows if you research, do science, you know that coal, oil, natural gas are all finite resources, and we have already hit peak production. So we will never ever get back to the production that we had before. That is why we need to use the revenues from those to diversify our economy. Now, I promise you, the world needs energy, and we will extract every bit of coal we can out of Wyoming. That's not the problem. The problem is figuring out how we're going to diversify our economy to sustain it after coal is no longer available.
Mary.
I am the candidate in the race with the most experience in the energy industry. I supported President Trump's repeal of the Clean Power Plan, and I opposed the Obama administration's regulations that affected coal in Wyoming. I've litigated against the Sierra Club's Beyond Coal campaign and won. But coal faces a challenging future due to market conditions, and we have to look for opportunities like a carbon capture pilot project in Wyoming. I'm a good ambassador for coal because of my expertise in the field.
Mr. Gordon.
Thanks. Well, Rex, you're exaggerating, and you know it. You can go to the right for Wyoming, and you'll see what's been talked about for 10 years. The fact of the matter is the Bank of the West is still closed to Wyoming. No change there. They are not open for the TDOA program. That was my decision. It still stays in effect. And the rest of the Bank of the West is also being discussed at this point by the Board of Deposits. I've worked for an oil and gas company, and I have funded uranium, coal, and oil and gas issues in this state. So, Rex, please don't misinform and misguide.
Believe me, I won't misinform. Are you denying that you've been part of Sierra Club and Friends of Earth and Rocky Mountain Institute, Nature Conservancy? These are all anti-fossil fuel groups. They want our fossil fuels in the ground. He's going to sit here and tell you he hasn't been involved with them? He's been on leadership positions. This man is an enemy to Wyoming. This would destroy Wyoming if he had his way. And Bank of the West, just 2 months ago, he said they're not going to get any funding under my watch.
That's enough. Mr. Gordon, I'm going to give you another shot.
Thank you. Thank you. This is the same old saw we often hear from Rex. But thank you very much for your support of me. You know that Wyoming's future is based on an all-fronts energy portfolio. You know that I've worked very hard to make sure that our coal industry has ports that are available to it. And you know that I've supported the uranium industry. So 5.5 years of track record you can look at on the state site. Before that, you can look at anything you want to, and I'm happy to discuss it. Thanks.
All right. Mr. Clements.
The next question, and it continues in the same vein. Lawrence, climate change policy is important to Wyoming policy. How do you educate yourself about climate change? And when a landmark report, like the one we all heard a week ago from the United Nations Scientific Panel on Climate Change, is released, what do you take from it?
I think it is very important that we listen to the scientists and the researchers. Whatever the subject is, we find the best, the smartest people in those areas and listen to them and look at the research. And so, climate change, is a reality. The way I like to vision it is, imagine you have an ice box in the house and it's full of ice. And as it's melting, it cools the rest of your house. So it may even lower the temperature of the house as a whole. But eventually that ice is going to be gone. And right now, our ice boxes are Greenland and Antarctica, and they're getting smaller. And so what will happen when those ice boxes are gone? The Gulf Coast streams will stop flowing, a lot of the ocean will die, and so we need to look at what we can do to help it. Now, I don't believe that I don't feel that curbing the so I strongly support us increasing our wind renewable energy platform, and of course natural gas is a very clean energy, and we have lots of markets where we can sell our coal, so it's not like our coal will not have a marketplace.
All right, thank you, Harry.
I have said from the beginning that we have to make our fossil fuels industry part of the climate solution, not part of the climate problem. Whenever people in my party push back and say we can't have dirty fossil fuels, I fight back and I stand up for Wyoming's legacy industries, which are my heritage and my husband's family's heritage. But we will not promote those commodities by denying the scientific consensus. That puts us in a weaker position. We have to look for opportunities for those fuels.
Mr. Gordon.
Well, thanks. That very same climate report talked about the importance of climate or carbon capture and sequester technology. Wyoming has been a leader in that. We've built the first body of law. We have the ITC. I funded the Atlas Carbon Project, and now we have the opportunity with maybe refitting Dave Johnson to be able to do something called BECCS, which is carbon negative. That would refurbish our plant, allow us to produce our coal, reduce our carbon, and have the added benefit of enhanced oil recovery. It's a good win-win-win solution.
Mr. Rammell.
Except for the economy. Global warming and climate change is the biggest hoax that's ever been dropped on America in United States history. We have gone through warming and cold periods for thousands of years. Why do you think that burning some coal is going to put enough carbon in the atmosphere to burn up the earth? Now, all this scientific consensus, there's a lot of people on my side of this thing don't believe this is scientific consensus. I think it's terrible, and I think that it's just more reason why the coal industry is getting hurt. All this global warming and climate change stuff is hurting Wyoming.
All right, I think we have.
And then Lawrence has an opportunity.
Yeah. For response. So I just want to say that we are, I believe, 4th in the nation for wind production capacity, and there are over $10 billion of wind projects wanting to come to Wyoming. And we need to act now. Right now, wind is the cheapest energy in the nation, followed by natural gas and solar. But we need to address it now. In order to do that, we need to develop a renewable standard portfolio so that we can attract the wind energy to Wyoming while wind energy is still the most affordable. Thank you.
One more.
Okay, this will be the final question, and this is for Mary. The Wyoming Department of Education promotes the Hathaway Scholarship as a benefit available to all Wyoming students, yet it's not available to high school graduates with DACA status. Increasing the number of Wyomingites with advanced degrees has been identified as key to the state's economic advancement. Should Hathaway be extended to DACA students?
That's an issue that I don't recall we ever discussed when I was in the legislature, but I think it should be extended to DACA students. We've educated them in high school. If they achieve the Hathaway benchmarks, they should be entitled to the scholarship. They graduate from our high schools like everybody else, and they live in our state. You know, I worked a lot on the Hathaway program. I worked to get a weighted grade point average to keep Hathaway strong. And I think if we want to encourage our young people to go to college and take advantage of what Hathaway has to offer, that it has to be available to everyone. You know, one of the weaknesses of Hathaway, though, is its lack of support for career technical education. And whether we use, I don't think Hathaway could really sustain career technical education support, but we do need to fill that gap in the Hathaway program.
Mr. Gordon?
Well, I would look at what the legislature did. This is a legislative issue to start with. I do believe that we have to have a comprehensive immigration solution. But to the point that Mary makes, it is also important to remember the Hathaway can only go so far. We need to make sure that we extend it as far as it can go, but it doesn't need to do CCTE education. What it really needs to do is to focus on what it was meant to do, which is higher education. And we can build a trust fund for CCT education, and I've recommended that to go under the Amendment A program.
Mr. Rammell?
Well, if President Trump has his way, there won't be any DACA students. So we won't have to give them a Hathaway scholarship. And I support it. If they're not residents, they shouldn't be entitled to public money. It's just that simple. We've got to quit giving money away to everybody. My God, people are crazy. Everybody's got to get free money from somebody. Why don't we start taking responsibility for our own lives and quit thinking money grows on trees?
One of the main goals as governor is to make sure that we have well-educated people here in the state, people that love this state, want to work in this state. If we have people that go up through our school system, we want to try to educate those people and keep them in the state so that they can help our state prosper. If we don't allow people from outside our state to come here, then we're not going to grow as an economy. And so it's critical for our future.
Mary?
You know, I think that it's troubling in Wyoming when our federal system fails as badly as it does. I would work with our congressional delegation, encourage them to do comprehensive immigration reform, because the children, the students who've lived in this country their entire lives through no fault of their own should not suffer because the leaders in Washington can't get their act together to solve the problem of comprehensive immigration reform.
All right, now I
Ready
think...
for closing statements.
Pardon?
We're ready for closing statements
for closing.
in reverse order.
And the first candidate to close, Mr. Struempf.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for being here. Thank you for those of you out there in the television audience. I am a third-party candidate. I have limited funding. I'm a moderate or modern libertarian, which means I believe in protecting the individual's freedoms and rights while being fiscally conservative. Now, with the modern libertarian, we want to keep the services that our government that Americans have fought and died 200 years for. We want to keep our national parks and our public lands. We want to keep our public education system and make it better. One thing that is critical is that we get rid of this two-party system. Please, 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 I'm asking you all for your help, for your vote, to build a strong third party. I'm major in support of Wyoming Promise, which is trying to push a 28th Amendment, which will restrict dark money and super PACs, which fund many of our Republican and Democratic candidates. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rammell.
Thank you everybody for listening to me. And Judge, I'm glad you didn't find me in contempt of court. I got a little excited there. I want you to know that I am seriously worried about Wyoming. There's been policies in place by the two major parties that have put Wyoming in terrible shape. We've got the 43rd economy in the United States, and we've had it since 2006. And I am very worried that if I am not elected governor, that this state will go blue. And I'm serious. We have three very liberal positions of these candidates. I am the only real conservative talking conservative positions. To you people out there throughout Wyoming, please You don't have to just vote for a major party. There are others that have brains. I think that we can correct this thing, but it's going to take some fortitude, and it's going to take a governor with a strong backbone. And we need to challenge the federal government over their jurisdiction. We are a half a state. We don't even control half of this state, and it's time Wyoming took control and took control of our own future.
Mr. Gordon.
Well, thank you, Justice, and thank you, Tennessee, Craig, and Dallas. It's been an interesting evening, and I've really enjoyed it. Thank you, fellow candidates. You know, Wyoming has a very tough future to consider, but we are at a crossroads and we have great opportunities. When you think about the issues of education, health, budget, and economic growth, these are all choices that we can make, and that's going to take a leader with a proven track record, a proven conservative track record. And if you look at my record, you'll see I've been able to bring people together to make real changes in this state that have saved you money. I'm the only candidate that saved you taxpayer dollars. I'm the only candidate that's worked with the legislature to improve business. And I'm the only candidate who is willing to stand up for you to make sure that we have the greatest state and the brightest future. I would invite you to join me on November 6th, and I would humbly ask for your vote. Thank you very much.
Mary Throne.
Thank you. Thank you, Justice Golden. It's nice to appear in front of you again in a completely different way. And thank you to the reporters, and thanks to all of you for listening, and thanks to those who contributed questions. I stumbled across Al Simpson's 9 greatest quotes the other day on Facebook, and don't worry, the more colorful ones I'm going to leave off, and I don't think I could deliver them anyway. But the one that spoke to me was, telling the truth is the essence of leadership. I did not get into this race to tell people in Wyoming what they want to hear. I got in this race to tell people what they need to know. Wyoming is facing some incredible challenges, and if we keep doing things the same old way, we will not be able to survive those challenges. It is not the truth to say that we can build a top class or maintain our top flight education system without talking about the evil tax structure. No one wants to talk about it, but I'm willing to do it. I will always tell the truth, I'll be straightforward, and with me, we will break the boom and bust cycle, and I would ask for your support on November 6th.
Well, that concludes our debate. And how about a hand for the candidate? And now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you on behalf of our sponsors. Dallas, thank you. Craig, thank you. Tennessee, thank you. We hope it has been helpful to all of you in the audience and those long distance to help you decide who you want to represent Wyoming as its next governor. I join Wyoming Public Media, Casper College, Wyoming PBS, and the Casper Star-Tribune in thanking these candidates for running for public office and for participating in the 2018 Republican Gubernatorial primary debate. Have a good evening and be careful going home.